All right, so now that we got some barrels rolling down the screen, it's about time we got a player in here, and this, to me, really kind of shows off the power of the kit because, all of your controls are essentially rigged up already for the external controller, the Apple TV remote. And touches are kind of as easy as ever. So which doesn't say they're easy, but anyway, let's go ahead and put a new sprite in here. I'm going to set the custom class to player. The name of it doesn't, and we can just put in here the player, but what we'll do is we'll just basically look for one player, and if we find it, that'll just be our one instance of a player. And since this is a free video, let's just go ahead and throw Mario in there. He just looks so at home, doesn't he? And then what we'll do is go ahead and set the physics body to bounding circle. I'm going to take allows rotation off, just so I don't get into a situation where he just starts rolling down there. But otherwise, you can see that dynamic is set on and so is affected by gravity. So if you wanted to kind of test this out, you could just kind of put him up there and just see what happens. Okay, so he falls right back down. Perfect. All right. Now, what we would want to do is go ahead and put in here a new class if you want. Actually, you can go ahead and duplicate one of your other ones. Just remember that there is always that danger when you duplicate of working in the wrong file right away. So duplicate it, but then kind of click out of there and then just be sure you click back into it. Make sure you are actually using the player class. Let's go ahead and change that to player. Again, this will be a subclass of SKSprite node. And let's just go ahead and take out everything that's currently in here. I'll leave the setup function in, and actually, take that back. I'll also put in here, leave in here the update function. You know what though? If you wanted to, you could leave in this as well. In my little demo, I didn't include that, but you might as well. So let's put this back. So var initial position, and of course this is going to be CG points, not spelled like that. And you can make this equal to CG point 0 initially, and then of course when we call setup on this, we'll just make our initial position equal to self dot position. Then if he did fall back down over one of those ramps, he's going to return over there. Okay, so let's put a little print statement here just to see that setup player worked. And of course, we actually need to call setup on this. And if you remember, we have in our, I believe it's our operations file, a function called setUpChildren, where we basically just look through all of the children in the scene. This is how we set up our platforms, our barrels. So I'm just going to copy out this else if statement over here. And so if the code comes across a player, then in that case, what it's going to do is create this little instance variable named SomePlayer, and we actually, let's do this. We want to be able to access the player outside of just the scope of this function. So what we'll do is we'll just make the player equal to SomePlayer. All right, so that's the player is going to be a variable that we declare, and then from that point on, what we can do is we can say the player setup. But what we need to do is go and declare this. So go back over here to your main game scene file where you declare everything. You can't just do it at the top of one of your extensions. And let's see, where are we putting all this? We haven't actually declared anything yet, have we? Well, I have, but in terms of this tutorial, we really haven't. So let's put in here var, the player, and you're going to specify this is going to be a player type. When you can just initialize it with kind of nothing going on at all in there, just write player. And then when you return back over here to your operations file, it should, let's see. Oh, I just got to put in there self. There we go. All right. And then let's see. I'll just build this real quick. I'll pause this for a moment. I just want to make sure that actually is getting set up. Okay, so sure enough, definitely is. And now we get to tinker around inside of our player class. So let's go over to here, and what we're going to do is put in here variable up at the top. This is going to be x speed. So this is going to be his speed along, you guessed it, the x-axis. Initially, we'll just make that 0, but when you move around the controllers, obviously we will change that. And let's go ahead and put in here some functions for doing exactly that. Let's move that out of the way. All right, so we're going to say func go right. What better name than that, right? And we can go ahead and copy this out a couple times. Let's call this one stop walk. This one will be go left. And just for testing, we're not going to put any animation in here, at least for right now. I just want to see that you guys to see that he can move around. So what we're going to do is if we call go right, the X speed is going to be 3. And then we also want to make sure that the X scale is going to be set to 1, which is the default. All right, but if you go left, then we're going to change our speed to -3. And then the X scale is going to be -1, which is going to just flip around on the X axis. And then if we stop walking, you guessed it, X speed is going to be 0. And would you imagine we're done at that point? Well, not exactly. We got a bit more to go, but it's really not too much more. So what we're going to do is put it here. And you know what? I almost typed it inside of the if statement. We don't want to do that. We want to put self dot position is going to equal CG point make, and of course this is going to be our current X location plus that X speed, right? And then we're just going to leave the Y alone, all right? So that's just going to be Y. Now, of course, when we jump up, we'll adjust that, but we'll worry about that in just a moment. So let's go, and by the way, we do need to actually call this function. We haven't done that yet. So let's go back over here to our game scene. We want to do that inside of our, just our main game scene class and the update state. Remember, this is kind of like our game engine, or at least I'm reserving it in my mind for engine-y type things like calling these update statements. So we're just going to put in here the player updates, and that takes care of that. Then let's head over here to our game scene underscore controls. And remember, I've got most of the stuff to do with connecting up the controllers in our game controllers file, but in terms of actually just giving you these print statements for what you're doing with, for example, the D-pad, the buttons, the left thumbstick, all that is in this one big giant file. So for right now, let's just deal with the directional pad when we tap right or left and let go of it. So what we're going to do is just right here, the player, go right, the player, go left, and then we also have in here these functions for letting go. So has anybody ever said that to you? You gotta let go, and there we go. So the player dot stop walk. I don't know if anybody has ever said that to me. Okay, there we go. So stop walk gets called in those two places. And we should actually be able to test this out. Let me pause for a second. I'll get it over on the Apple TV. All right, it's loading up. Let's hit the A button to proceed, and let's see where we're at. Okay, you can see that obviously our little guy is cruising right along here. Of course, he has no way to really dodge these barrels. Unfortunately, he's just going to get pushed down probably over here. I do want to test to see what happens if he falls all the way off, and sure enough, he ends right back up where he started from. All right, so that's a good sign. Let's put in the actions for getting him to jump, and then I think at the end of the last video, I did talk about we need to adjust the property list so that we can put in a property for whether or not we want those barrels to randomly drop. So let's try not to forget about that. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is get this guy jumping around. Okay, so let's go back into our player class. And we're going to write func and jump. Okay, so let's do this. Let's put a variable in here called jump var. This is going to be a CG float type variable. And actually, I should rename this just slightly. I'm going to call it jump x var. So this is going to be the amount he goes on the x-axis when jumping. Okay. And if you wanted, you could put in here another variable just for the y. In my notes here, I have much more of a reason to put it in a variable for the x, though, and I'll show you why. So what we want to do is test to see if he is facing left or right. He's going to jump up the same amount regardless of whether or not he goes left or right. But if he's facing one direction, we want to make this jump x var a negative number. And be sure you actually put in there the double equal signs. Another thing you could do actually is you might find that this happens. You could say if the x scale is less than 0, and that would occur if, I don't know, if you kind of tampered with the sizing of it. I don't know. I guess just for right now, just do the double equal signs. And what I mean by tampering with the size is if you were to go over to here and start messing around with, so you can actually adjust the scale over here. Yeah, let's kind of forget that we talked about that. just be aware it could be an issue. All right, so we're gonna say x scale. If it's equal to -1, then what we're gonna do is change our jump x var. So put in here jump x var, and if you want, you can just make it equal to itself times -1, so that way you don't have to adjust numbers twice in there, because it's just going to be -50 then. And then what we're going to do is a test to see if he's already jumping. Okay, so or really what if he's not jumping. So we're going to say if self.action for key jump equals nil, so that means he's not currently jumping, and you'll see that the action key come back in just a second over here. Then what we're going to do is let him jump, and we're going to take kind of a fun little approach to this. We're going to actually turn off gravity for him. If only you could do that in real life. And then what we'll do is just create an SKAction. So this is going to be SKAction. This is going to equal SKAction.move by x. And here's where our jump x var comes in. And then for the y, that's going to be our jump y var. We're going to put a duration in here. I found a short time. Looks a little bit more like a classic game. And then we're going to put in here another SKAction, which is, I'm just going to call it run code. SKAction, this is going to equal SKAction.run block, and Swift 3, that's just going to be run. And we're going to write self.physicsBody.affected by gravity equals true again. So remember, we turned it off, and then what we want to have happen is after this occurs, so basically he's at the kind of apex of his jump, gravity will get kicked back on, and he'll go back down. But as he's going back down, it looks a little weird if he just kind of drops from that point, because remember, we kind of moved him forward a bit. So what we're going to also do then is put in here another SKAction. This one will just be moved by x yet again, and this time it's our jump x var. No different, because we're just going to push him forward a little bit more. Oh, and sorry, we don't want to put anything on the y-axis, and then just 0.25 again. Okay, so now what we need to do is just make a sequence. So I'm going to say let sequence. This is going to be an SKAction again. SKAction.sequence, and all it's asking us for here is an array. So in our opening and closing brackets, we're going to put in here move up, run code, move down, and then all we have to do is run this guy. Remember, I think I mentioned before, in Swift 3, that's just going to be run for run action. SCQ with key, and there's that with key again. So there's the jump, and I guess it's just telling us this could be lit. Huh? All right, so now all we have to do is figure out when we want to make him jump, and that's a pretty easy one. Go back over here to our controls. So tapped up. So we're going to say the player jump. Okay, and let's give it a shot. Not sure what the error is. Probably nothing. Okay. Hey, look at that nice lush field. Hopefully, look, there's my house right there. Nope. Never mind. It's a sand dune. I thought it looks just like my roof. Okay, and here we go. Getting fired up. Who's ready to make a watch app with Sprite Kit? All right, so I'm going to press up. Doink. Over here. Some of the effect is certainly lost when you don't actually have something that looks like he's jumping. Same with running too. It just doesn't feel right, does it? Okay, and I think timing these barrels in is really important, because otherwise you get into a situation where this is impossible to jump over them. All right, so let's do that. Okay, so let's head over to our settings dictionary inside of our game. And since this is a great place to put it, because obviously we're already parsing through at some point the settings. So let's go ahead and just add in here a new property, and I'll move this just up over here. So we're going to call this barrel, oops, get your spelling right, barrel drop time, and we want to be sure that this is set to being a number. So I'm going to put in here 3, and down the road, you know, if you want to ever just kind of turn this off and test that the other way, you can just put it in here off, because obviously anything other than barrel drop time is going to, you know, register that the key does not exist, essentially. So go over here to our property list now, and what we're going to want to do, you've little shortcut here, just look for settings. Okay, there we go, settings, and then copy just the first or only if statement that's inside of here, and we're going to say else if, so just paste that down there. So we're checking to see if barrel drop time exists, right? And we want to test to see if this is if the value is an NS time interval, and if so, we'll do something right down here. But let's go back over here to the game scene real fast and just set up the 2 properties that we want to include for making that happen. All right, so let's go put them down here with our player. So we're going to put in here var and then barrel. I try to keep the variable names the same as the properties, so it's kind of easier to look through the code, but just make the first letter lowercase, and then keeping with our existing variable inside of the barrel class, we'll just call this random drop here in the game scene as well. So what I'll do is I'll make this initially set to being true. Okay, so then if you have that random drop time in there, it'll make random drop end up being false. So let's copy this for right now, head back over here to the property list, replace out that with barrel drop time, and then we want to make sure that its settings value as NS time intervals in there. So as long as it's a number, it'll realize, oh, I can make that, you know, into an NS time interval. So that'll end up being true. And then what we want to do is set random drop, it might not realize the variables in there yet, to false at that point, okay, because we're not randomly dropping, we're using a very specific time. Now what we want to do is let's go over to our operations file, let's find our barrel, and what we want to do then is say, remember this is right before we set up all of our barrels, we're going to say some barrel.random drop is going to equal to self.random drop. Okay, so if that's false, then this is going to end up being false as well. And then let's go over here to where we actually start dropping these barrels, if they're going to be timed. And if you remember, we called this function to do that. So what we want to do is now uncomment that out, and then we're just going to put in here if random drop equals false. Okay, so we're not randomly dropping. We're going to time in our barrel rolls. We're going to say start rolling barrels, and then what we want to do is put in here for the duration, remember that's how long we're waiting, our barrel drop time, right? And I guess, you know, what's another thing you could consider doing is just maybe putting in here a catch or something like that to make sure that barrel drop time is never below a certain amount. So you could say, you know, if barrel drop time is less than, I don't know, 1, then you just make it 1, something like that. But obviously you don't have to do that. I'll go ahead and throw it in there though. Okay, and I believe that actually does it. Let's test it out. Not convinced I got everything, but we'll find out in just a moment. Okay, sure enough, it looks like these are all timed in at, excuse me, every 3 seconds. Kind of had them laid out in an odd fashion. I forgot about that. And then what we'd want to then check too is if this was switched off, what happens then? Okay. Fire it up. And hopefully we get something a little bit more random. Okay, obviously 2 dropping at the same time definitely means that it was not timed in. Okay, so there you go. Let's try to jump over some of these barrels here. I believe it is possible. Yoink, did it. All right, so more to come, I guess. But we've gotten a little something in there, right?